So welcome everyone to the last lecture of today and of this research school. Lauren Williams will continue with her series on down amplituhedron.
So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming yet again. I'm getting a little sick of hearing myself speak, and I wouldn't blame you if you were too. Anyway, let me just recall the main definitions. So we have the totally non-negative or positive Grassmannian, which is the subset of the real Grassmannian where the Plücker coordinates are all non-negative. And in the first and second lecture, we talked about how we have a cell decomposition where we can write this this non-negative Grassmannian as a union of positroid cells. And so these are called positroid cells. They can be labeled by various combinatorial objects. For example, the planar bicolored graphs or the decorated permutations that we talked about. And this decomposition into cells is just the sort of simplest possible decomposition you can imagine, where you just partition the non-negative Grassmannian into pieces based on which Plücker coordinates are strictly positive and which are 0. And then the amplituhedron is the image of this positive Grassmannian under a particular map. So we fix numbers k and m with k plus m at most n, and we fix a positive matrix Z, which is n by k plus m, and the property we require is that maximal minors are positive. And then this choice of matrix defines an amplituhedron a n k m of Z, which is the image of the positive Grassmannian under the amplituhedron map, which I'll just review briefly below. So, so the amplituhedron map is the map from the non-negative Grassmannian into the related Grassmannian of k-planes and k plus m space. And it's defined by sending a k-plane written as the row span of a k by n matrix C to the row span of the matrix C times Z. Okay, and so let me just write it again and point out some things about dimension. So the non-negative Grassmannian has dimension k times n minus k, and the amplituhedron, which lies inside the Grassmannian of k-planes and k plus m space, has dimension km, which in general is less than or equal to k times n minus k. So in general, this map is highly surjective and fails to be injective. Okay, but now we know a lot about the left-hand side, and so it makes sense to try to use the left-hand side to understand the right-hand side. So given such a surjective map C tilde, it's natural to try to decompose the right-hand side using images of positroid cells. Okay, now let me just take a step back. So I could generalize the setup a little bit, and let's suppose we have any surjective map from the non-negative Grassmannian onto some space X. And let's say that, that X is a D-dimensional cell complex or a subset of one. Okay, then I want to decompose X using images of positroid cells. And the nicest such decomposition would involve images of cells on which my map is injective. So if SG is a D-dimensional positroid cell, then we will say that the image of this cell, and maybe I'll say the closure, is a positroid tile for my map phi if phi is injective on this cell. And then we'd say that we want to decompose the image using positroid tiles. So let's define a positroid tiling of X to be a collection of positroid tiles whose union is X and whose interiors are pairwise disjoint. Okay, so we could do this for any continuous surjective map from the positive Grassmannian onto some other space X, as long as I have some notion of what it means to be D-dimensional. And so a very sort of general question would be to classify positroid tiles and find positroid tilings. And you see this is related to, so in the case of the amplituhedron, physicists were looking for these kinds of positroid tilings because they were trying to compute the volume of the amplituhedron. The volume was supposed to compute scattering amplitudes, and in order to compute the volume, they wanted to cut up the amplituhedron into smaller pieces. And for this audience, I'll just mention that when our map phi is the amplituhedron map Z tilde, then we conjecture that there's a, so, and let me point out, let me just write Z tilde as this map from the positive Grassmannian into the related Grassmannian. We conjecture that there's a cluster structure on a subvariety of the Grassmannian in the image whose positive part is any given positroid tile. Sorry, that wasn't, I didn't state that very clearly. What I want to say is that if phi is the amplituhedron map, then we conjecture that for every positroid tile living in the amplituhedron, you can find a cluster structure on a subvariety of the Grassmannian whose positive part is that positroid tile. And this is something that is proved with Sherman, Bennett, and Parisi in the case m equals 2, but open in general. And so now you see the amplituhedron gets cut up into many top dimensional pieces. So this leads to this sort of odd phenomenon that the amplituhedron is a union of, in general, many positive parts of cluster varieties. Right, we're sort of used to this phenomenon that you have a coordinate ring and you have a cluster structure on it, and then the positive, and then there's sort of one positive part, which is the positive part of your variety. But this is a sort of different phenomenon where we have our object that we're interested in cut up into many top-dimensional pieces, each of which has an interpretation as the positive part of some cluster variety. Okay, so now I hope I've motivated this notion of positron tiling. Now I just want to show some very hands-on concrete examples. So let's take K is 1, N is 4, M is 2. And so our amplituhedron map goes from the positive Grassmannian of 1 planes in 4 space onto this amplituhedron, which lies in the Grassmannian of 1 plane in 3 space, also known as projective space of dimension 2. And this is the K equals 1 example in which we looked at last time, and saw can be thought of just as a polygon in P2. So these points, Z1, Z2, Z3, Z4, can be thought of as the row vectors of my 4×3 matrix Z. Okay, so so now we can say, okay, on which, so since my image is 2-dimensional, we can ask, all right, on which 2-dimensional cells of the Grassmannian is the amplituhedron map injective? And this is something that's easy to work out, but I'll just tell you the answer. It's injective on exactly 4 two-dimensional cells of this positive Grassmannian, and I could write them in various ways. I will draw the Playback graphs for these cells. So, so here is a Playback graph for a cell. This represents one of the 2-dimensional cells on which the amplituhedron map is injective. And I claim Z tilde is injective on this cell, and it's 3 other rotations, right? We can just rotate our labels. And let me just say more concretely what this cell represents. We'll try to remember how to read off that cell using the dimers or perfect matchings. So to read off the non-vanishing Plücker coordinates for the related cell, we look at almost perfect matchings. So there's going to be exactly 3 perfect matchings here, and they will be this, this, and this. And then to read off the non-vanishing Plücker coordinates, we look at what endpoints are involved. So it's endpoint number 1 here, endpoint number 2, and endpoint number 3. And so the description of this particular cell is it's the set of all points in the non-negative Grassmannian of 1 plane in 4 space, so just represented by full rank 1×4 matrices, and my Plücker coordinates 1, 2, and 3 are strictly positive, and the rest are 0. So this is my cell. I claim the amplituhedron map is injective on this cell, and it has the following image in the amplituhedron, it'll be this top part. Okay. So, and then I said there were 3 other cells which you get by cyclically rotating G, and they're just the cells that are obtained by specifying that exactly one Plücker coordinate is 0 and the rest are positive. So those are the positroid tiles. So we get 4 positroid tiles, and there are exactly 2 positroid tilings. So those positroid tilings are just the 2 triangulations of this foregon. And this is the Playbit graph, which gives rise to the top triangle, and then the Playbit graph giving rise to the bottom triangle is going to be this one. Okay. All right. So this was the case where K is 1, N is 4, and M is 2. And I think it's not hard to convince yourself if K is 1 and M is 2 and N is general, the positroid tilings of this amplituhedron, which is just an n-gon in P2, are just exactly the triangulations of the n-gon. So there are the Catalan number of them. Okay. Okay, so I hope the notion of positroid tile and tiling is clear. This is the easiest possible example for the amplituhedron map, but now let's talk about another natural map. So there is another natural map from the non-negative Grassmannian to another space, and I want to talk now about the moment map. Let's see, maybe I'll just recopy my definition of positroid tile and tiling and put that up while I define the moment map. Okay, so this is just okay, so that's the notion of positroid tile and tiling, and now let me define the moment map. So the moment map, so it's normally thought of as a map from the Grassmannian, but we can certainly restrict it to the non-negative part. And it's a map into Rn defined as follows. So if C is a matrix or that I identify with an element of the Grassmannian, then mu of C is equal to the following. So we'll sum over all K element subsets of 1 through N. And then we have a coefficient, which is the Plücker coordinate squared times EI. Let me define EI. EI is a vector in Rn, and this is the 0, 1 vector with ones in positions I. Okay, so it's this weighted sum of these 0, 1 vectors, EI, and then I just divide by the sums of the squares of all Plücker coordinates. Okay, so this moment map is a kind of classical object by now. I think it was first really explored in the case of the Grassmannian by Gelfand, Goreski, McPherson, and Serganova. And the moment map image of the Grassmannian, and also the non-negative part of the Grassmannian, is a very nice polytope called the hypersimplex. And this is just the convex hull of all of the EIs. So this is a polytope in Rn. It has codimension 1, so it has dimension n minus 1. And delta 2, 4 combinatorially looks like a octahedron. Okay, so we can ask about moment map images of positroid cells. And in a paper we wrote some years back with Emanuel Zuckerman, well, one thing that we verified is that the image, the moment map image of a positroid cell, SG, is exactly the positroid polytope, which is the convex hull of all the E sub i's corresponding to Plücker coordinates, which are strictly positive on the cell. Yeah, if you're in the case of the real Grassmannian and you're not restricting to the positive part, then this statement comes from, I think, Gelfand, Goreski, McPherson, and Serganova, but one has to make sure that when you're restricting to the non-negative part, you still get the same, this full polytope and not some subset of it. So let me just draw a small example. So let's take the positive part of the Grassmannian of 2 planes in 4 space. And let's take our playbit graph G to be this one. And since I'm talking about matchings, I'm always making sure that every boundary vertex is incident to a white vertex. And now this graph has 5 almost perfect matchings. I'll draw them. And now, so let me draw the matchings. So we have this one, this one, this one, and this one. And then we look at which boundary vertices are touched by an edge in the matching. And here we get 1, 2. Here we get 1, 4. Here we get 1, 3, 2, 4, and 2, 3. And so that's telling us that SG is the set of points where, so let's see, so 5 of my 6 Plücker coordinates need to be positive. So all Plücker coordinates positive, except for the 2-element subset that didn't show up as one of my sets. And then the moment map image of this cell is going to be this little pyramid. So this will be E12, E24, E23, E13, and E14. Okay, and now, so this is just an example of the moment map image of some positroid cell. But now let's talk again about positroid tiles and tilings. So the positroid tiles are the cells of maximum dimension such that the moment map is injective, and then a positroid tiling is a way of cutting up your space into positroid tiles. And so here I claim, and it's not hard to check, that mu is injective on exactly 4 three-dimensional cells of G24. And here I'm requiring, so yeah, so in our little example, mu is a map from the non-negative Grassmannian onto the hypersimplex, and this is a three-dimensional polytope. And so that's why I'm looking for three-dimensional cells on which mu is injective. And so these three-dimensional cells are SG, and also the 3 cells coming from rotating the graph G, or if you like, just cyclically rotating the labels. Okay, so in this example, we have 4 positroid tiles, and we have exactly 2 positroid tilings of the hypersimplex. So I'll just show them. There's this one where I cut the hypersimplex along that green plane, and the graph has imaged the top part, and then the other graph whose image is the bottom part is this one. So this is one of the 2 positroid tilings, and the other one is obtained from my other 2 positroid tiles, and they cut up the space like this. And the graphs are this and this one. Okay, so my very small example, I find 2 positroid tilings. And if I slightly generalize the example, the number of positroid tilings of the hypersimplex delta k plus 1 comma n is, again, a Catalan number, the same one we saw before. Okay, now so we saw Catalan numbers when we looked at positroid tilings of the amplituhedron A N12, and we see Catalan numbers when we look at positroid tilings of the hypersimplex. And this is not a coincidence, and it generalizes further. So this is a really weird result with Parisi and Sherman Bennett. and me, which is that positroid tiles and tilings for the moment map onto the hypersimplex are in bijection with positroid tiles and tilings for the amplituhedron map from a different Grassmannian, this is GRKN instead of GRK plus 1, onto the amplituhedron ANK2 of Z. And this is weird. I think this is very weird for a lot of reasons. One of them is that the hypersimplex is a polytope. The amplituhedron for m equals 2 is not a polytope. Well, for k equals 1, it's a polytope, but in general, it's not a polytope. And the hypersimplex has dimension n minus 1, and the amplituhedron has dimension 2 times k. And finally, these are different Grassmannians. So I find this very strange, but I can tell you now how the correspondence goes. I've been clearly not moving around enough because I have automatic light switches in my office, and it just goes dark if I don't move enough. But anyway, it's okay, I can see by the illumination of my iPad. Okay, so now let me tell you how to classify positroid tiles. And it'll be for both the moment map and the amplituhedron. So script T is going to be a bicolored triangulation of an n-gon with k triangles colored black and the rest white. And so we're going to call this an objective type k comma n. So let me just draw a picture. So, and I am labeling vertices of my polygon from 1 through n. So it's a triangulation. It's like standard triangulation. And then some triangles will be colored black like this, and others will be white. And now I'm going to use this object to construct 2 different playback graphs. So we use tau to construct 2 playback graphs. So in my first playback graph is essentially just going to be the dual graph. So I'm going to put a vertex inside every black triangle. I should say a solid vertex inside every black triangle and a hollow vertex inside every white triangle. And then I draw edges dual to the edges of the triangulation, and I label the boundary like this. So this gives me a playback graph that we'll call G of T. Okay, and then we will also construct a different playback graph by putting a hollow vertex inside every black triangle, and then a solid vertex on every vertex of the triangulation, and then connecting things like this. So this is a construction that will probably look familiar to some of you, because if you're thinking about the cluster structure on G2N, which we know can be described by both triangulations and by Playbit graphs, this is the sort of recipe that you use. Although normally you don't use the sort of bicolored thing like this. Okay, so anyway, so we have two Playbit graphs associated to our bicolored triangulation, and then the theorem is as follows. So first of all, the positroid tiles for the moment map. So in other words, the cells on which, so the n-1 dimensional cells on which the moment map is injective are precisely the images of cells coming from Playbit graphs G of T for T, A, K, N bicolored triangulation. Okay, so the only n-1 dimensional cells on which the moment map is injective are those coming from Playbit graphs like this. So they're trees and they're dual to these bicolored triangulations. And then, yeah, actually, I should say this is building on our earlier work with Emanuel Zuckerman, this first statement. And then the positroid tiles for the amplituhedron map are precisely things coming from cells associated to Playbit graphs G hat of T. Again, for tau A, Kn bicolored triangulation. So the only 2K dimensional cells on which the amplituhedron map is injective are the cells coming from these Playbit graphs. And then finally, the positroid tilings of these two spaces are in bijection, where the correspondence is exactly what you'd think it is. It's exchanging graphs coming from Playbit graphs G of T with graphs coming from Playbit graphs G hat of T. And so let me just recopy the pictures that we had before. So on the one hand, we have two positroid triangulations of the amplituhedron. And then on the other hand, we have two, I should say positroid tilings. And then on the other hand, we have two positroid tilings of the hypersimplex. And so this is the delta 2,4 picture. This is the amplituhedron A412 picture. And and the bijection takes this picture to this picture. Okay, so that's all I was planning to say. I realized I didn't say a whole lot about cluster structures. So I'll just mention that one can use this combinatorics to put cluster structures on generalized triangles for the amplituhedron when m is 2, and you sort of follow your nose in terms of using, you know, the quiver dual to that Playbit graph, and then cluster variables wind up being signed versions of twistor coordinates. So I will stop there.
Very much for you in this lecture. Are there any questions? There are some questions in the chat. I have a question to that last picture that you showed with the dark.
This one here?
No, the one where you said we can define cluster variables, I think.
Oh, yes, yes.
So if you consider larger pieces, not triangles, you can do similar stuff, but then I think you get something for n and not k equals 2, but larger k.
Oh, is that a question or a statement?
No, it's both. I mean, I've studied those in work with Paul Martin, but we didn't look at the cluster algebra side. Do you think?
Oh, okay. Maybe you can give me a reference.
Yeah, I'll send you one.
Yeah, I would like to take a look at that. But you're saying, how do you change this picture?
Instead of taking triangles in the polygon, we take arbitrary tiles, and then you can still do the same stuff. You put like a circle inside the tile that you want to take. You make like this star to all the vertices. So you build out vertices on the polygon vertices, and it gives you again a Playbit graph. Just isn't the k equals.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. So yeah. So we don't do that, but we do consider. You know, we certainly do consider replacing, you know, this quadrilateral, which is triangulated, with simply the quadrilateral. And but what we see is that, you know, we have a move equivalence. If you retriangulate a gray polygon, then you get another Playbit graph, but it's move equivalent to the first. Yeah, so it's interesting to think about how this should relate to your construction. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll be very happy to see the reference.
Any other questions? Yes, Patton.
I just wondered if there's much interaction between the mathematicians and the physicists. Is there any hope that what's happening on the mathematical side would be used?
Oh, yes. Well, so my co-author, Matteo Parisi, is a physicist. And so, yes, there's been quite a bit of interaction. But I would say, yes, absolutely. I mean, some of the statements that we proved, so one of the statements that I talked about yesterday about describing the amplituhedron as a subset of the Grassmannian, this was a conjecture of Nima Arkani-Hamed, and who's a physicist, and Jaroslav Trnka, who's a physicist, and Hugh Thomas, who you guys probably know, is a mathematician. So so yeah, for sure there's been quite a bit of interaction. And you know, what's great is that the physicists will sort of make all these crazy claims, which are very interesting and inspire the mathematicians, and the physicists don't care so much about proving them, but their statements are usually correct, and so they're interesting problems to work on. Actually, as Nima once said in a talk, he said, "Oh, we physicists like proofs just as much as you mathematicians. We're just not any good at them." That was sort of that's how he put it. But they're very good at coming up with very interesting statements.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? If not, let's thank Lauren and all the speakers of today and all the speakers of the research school again.
And we absolutely should thank the organizers for putting together this very nice conference.
Yes.
We didn't catch most of them. Well, this concludes the research school. Thanks a lot for everyone attending and speaking. For the local participants, there is going to be drinks relatively soon.
Out here, right?
Yeah, we will bring them. I wasn't finished. We bring them here somewhere and then we can take them out. So if anyone wants to help, grab the beers and wine from upstairs. You can help now.
Sorry.